people are equating here in the state of Iowa this week. People are really equating this game to Iowa, Michigan, 1985, which was, of course, 1-2, which I'm sure Mark remembers fondly because it was. What's that?
12-10.
That's right. And Rob Houghton was the savior, the saving grace that day with his famous kick. And but yeah, it's been that long since Iowa's had a top 5 matchup in the Big Ten. So it's exciting on a lot of fronts. I know, of course, Big Noon will be there with Fox, and Bob Stoops will be there, who's obviously an Iowa guy, and there's a lot of interesting storylines, and maybe we can get Marty's perspective on this too. But I've seen a lot of people this week want to break down battles and positions, and of course, I think most fans are biased when they're doing this, but one thing that I think fans need to be careful of is doing that and thinking that you're going to be able to predict a feasible outcome based on that. I use the example of Wisconsin, Penn State. I look at Penn State and Wisconsin, and to me, Penn State's better defensively, although it's close. To me, they're much better offensively. There's not even a question. And they're probably around the same special teams wise, but that game was close. It came down to one score. Penn State very easily could have lost that game. So, Iowa's offense has improved. I'm not saying that they're a juggernaut. I'm not saying they're going to score in the 50s like they did against Maryland this past week. And I, for the record, I think Penn State's defense is far and above better than Maryland's. But I do think sometimes in a game like this, with as much hype as there is, I think of other Big Ten games, Iowa, Nebraska every year is always close, despite the fact that Iowa's usually leaps and bounds better. You just never know, and Big Ten football, college football in general is unpredictable. So maybe Marty can give us his insight as far as positions that maybe will make a major difference.
Yeah, I know one thing that I'm really going to be watching this game. I think will be very important for Penn State, and this is something we saw them do a lot against Auburn. I know Iowa is a defense that likes to rotate a lot of guys in their front seven. Against Auburn, a lot of times we saw Penn State take advantage of that deep tight end group with Brenton Strange, with Theo Johnson, with Tyler Warren, to be able to bounce from 12 personnel out to 11 personnel, basically by taking one of those tight ends and putting them out in the slot. So you can go to that 3-wide set and take advantage of having these tight ends who are great receivers without giving the defense the opportunity to sub. And against Auburn, whenever Penn State's offense kind of got stuck in a little bit of a rut, we would see them go to that with a lot of success because they were able to go to their tempo offense without allowing the Tigers to sub. And I think that is something I would really like to see Penn State do on Saturday to prevent Iowa from subbing his offense. They'd like to in the front seven. And I also think in general, just from what I've seen from Iowa this year and some of the things I have heard, his name is escaping my mind at the moment. I apologize for that, but Iowa's 247 writer, I was listening to a podcast he was on earlier in the week, and he said that he thinks Penn State's tight ends against Iowa's linebackers could be a real advantage for the Nittany Lions in the passing game. So when you combine those two things, I'd really like to see the Nittany Lions use those tight ends on Saturday afternoon and see if that can help spark this offense. Because I have no doubts, like you guys said, I think this definitely has rock fight potential to it. Two defenses that might be top 5 to top 10 nationally. Two offenses that while they have had plenty of success, you still have a lot of questions about them, especially the quarterbacks. So I think every little thing on offense can make a difference. And with the Nittany Lions, I really do think that tight end usage could be big on Saturday.
And let me just throw this in, Mark, and maybe we can get back to Tim. But I always defer to Coach Don Patterson, who joins us during our post-game show, because he's obviously the expert between the two of us. And I had a conversation with him last night, and when he does analytics for Kirk Ferentz still, and so he studies each and every game for every opponent that Iowa faces. So he was looking at the tape from Saturday, Indiana, Penn State, and he just had flat out said, the guy that really scares me is Dotson, and there's no question. I would go the same spot. I'm not saying that Penn State's tight ends can't hurt Iowa, but I go back to, for instance, the game against Iowa State. You could argue Iowa State has one of the best tight end groups. Certainly, Levi Stevenson of SB Nation would say that their tight end group is one of the best in the country. And Iowa kept Chase Allen and whatever the big kid's name, Kolar, kept them basically in check the entire game. Now, Iowa did struggle with a big tight end at Colorado State a couple of weeks ago, So I don't know. The good news with Phil Parker, if you're an Iowa fan and defending big tight ends, is you're used to doing that in practice every day because, of course, Iowa has kind of that pedigree of producing big tight ends who can block and who can run and who can catch. So I don't worry about that as much. Dotson's a mismatch. The good news for Iowa is have faced elite wide receivers thus far this year. They've already faced Ty Freifogel. And, of course, last week with Demas, although he was hurt early in that game. So I'm not as worried about tight end. But I saw that comment from I believe it was Joseph Walters in the chat. Dotson is the one that scares Don, and he's probably the one that keeps me up because we've seen. I mean, thinking about past Iowa Penn State matchups and rivals, beat writer Tom Kakert and I sat down last night during my podcast, and we just talked about some of the historical games, and maybe we can talk about that at some point during our show this evening, Mark. But the history of this rivalry, big plays have been a history of this rivalry. I think back to 2000, I want to say it's 2009. Daryl Clark hit a huge play. I think first drive of the game, and that really
first
set
play of the game.
Yeah, set the tone in that game. Now Iowa came back to win, but again, it was because of a huge play from Adrian Claiborne, special teams blocking a punt. So big plays are always big in this rivalry, and partially because they tend to be low-scoring games.
I mean, it's really hard to say based on their performance in Indiana who would have the edge. I mean, again, I think it's going to come. I guess I'm sounding like Captain Obvious here, but it's going to come down to whichever team takes care of the ball better on Saturday, especially for Penn State. They absolutely can't allow Iowa to continue its torrid pace of getting turnovers on the opponent's side of the field, and just having to go 40-ish yards or less to the end zone. And I noticed somebody in the Black Shoe Diary Slack channel shared with me a statistic today, and Iowa's average starting field position was at their own 38, which is far and away the best right now in FBS. So, I mean, you think about, like, on average, they only have to go 62 yards to get to the end zone, which is ridiculous. And I think Penn State's going to go in there and pull off the win Saturday. They're going to need to make sure, obviously, take care of the ball. But the other aspect, I think Corey alluded to it earlier, special teams. Jordan Stout, he's been tremendous for Penn State, not just on kickoffs, in which all but one of his kickoffs have gone for touchbacks so far, and the one that didn't went out of bounds. So Penn State doesn't even have to defend a kickoff return. More importantly, punting, he's been crushing it, whether it's booming a 50-plus yarder or if he's just trying to pin an opponent inside their own 20. He's been pretty stellar at that. In fact, he was named the Ray Guy punter of the week, either for the Big Ten or nationally, I forget, but I know he was named a punter of the week for his performance against Indiana. So it's really going to be very important that Jordan Stout is able, with the field position balance, able to flip the field and make Iowa have to go 75, 80, 90 yards even to reach the end zone. And, so Iowa hasn't been, in that way, they haven't been tested in terms of whether their offense can consistently march that far down the field and rack up points. Now, maybe they're capable of doing it, but we just don't know because their defense has played so well. They've been creating short fields for that offense.
Anything on special teams, Corey? Because we get the question below, and Tim certainly addressed it from the Penn State side. How would you rate Iowa's performance through 5 games?
Well, it's hard for me to compare because as far as punter is concerned, I guess we can compare. Iowa has one of the best punters in the country. I'm not doubting that Penn State doesn't either. That certainly changes the field position conversation because you're absolutely right, Tim. That has been huge. Iowa's elite everywhere on special teams. Now, I don't want to start sounding like I'm writing Penn State off in this game, but they are elite at every position. Charlie Jones is probably the best punt / kick. Well, at least punt return. I mean, Amir Smith-Marset was pretty elite returning kicks, but as far as punt returning, Charlie Jones is elite at punt return. Probably, I don't want to say in Kirk Ferentz era, but it's pretty close. I don't know who I would. Obviously Tim Dwight, but that goes back into the Hayden era. He is that good. Now again, that can be neutralized if you're punting out of bounds or you're punting for touchbacks on kickoffs. Iowa's kicker has been very underrated. He's a guy who's a super senior who actually got brought up in our post game the other day because I think he's one of the more underrated contributors that we've seen so far, because he's really not missing kicks, and he's hitting from every spot on the field. And he's doing the same on kickoffs as well. So that will be an interesting battle. It very well could come down to special teams. Again, I brought up 2009 and the difference in that game. Darryl Clark hits who did he hit, Tim, on the big touchdown? Who was the wide receiver that Darryl Clark hit on that first play?
That was that was Chaz Powell.
Chaz Powell,
yeah.
You got it. There it is. Yep. Good job on that. And so that changed things early, but what changed things late was Adrian Claiborne destroying a coverage guy. He wasn't an offensive lineman. Whoever he was that he ran through was a lot smaller than Adrian Claiborne. And he, of course, blocked it, scooped, and scored, and that was the difference. Iowa did tack on a late score in that one, and I believe a field goal. But, yeah, special teams are always huge. I think back to 2017. Saquon Barkley runs all over the field against Iowa. But, again, what did it come down to? Anthony Nelson blocks a huge field goal kick to keep Iowa in it. A couple big plays from Akram Wadley. And then, yeah, the long drive at the end was kind of obviously that's what won it. But up until that point, there really weren't any long sustained drives for either team that ended up in touchdowns. Iowa likes to play the bend, don't break. So if you break them early in a drive, that does change things. So I have no doubt that Sean Clifford and this offense, Franklin's going to have something tuned up, dialed up for Dotson. Special teams are going to be, I think, pretty even. I will say this as it relates to that question about comparing Penn State's win against Indiana and Iowa's win against Indiana. No disrespect to that question, but that means absolutely nothing in my mind. It just means absolutely zilch. We saw Iowa struggle to beat Colorado State, who had lost to South Dakota State, and Vanderbilt, who's maybe worse than Kansas. And yet then they come back and they just destroy Maryland on the road. So I've gotten in that trap of trying to compare wins and losses, and I just think it means very little. I will say this, to jump the gun here, and again, we don't have to make our predictions right now. For Iowa fans who are listening, I am more confident that Iowa is going to win this game this weekend than I was that Iowa was going to beat Maryland last week. And we can talk about why specifically, but that no disrespect to Penn State. I think Penn State's a better team, but I do believe that I'm more confident in that from what we've seen last week.